So the Future of Cities, it's the title of the Government Office for Science Foresight project on the future of cities. We use this thing on the right-hand side there as a kind of logo, really. And that's a 100-year history of the rankings of British cities by population size. And I don't want to take up my 20 minutes talking about the detail of that. What it's saying is that for a group, the group that I chaired, the expert group for this project, at least one other member is here, Tim Stoner, the Go Science team leader, Larry Jones is here, I think. So it was very much a shared enterprise. And our job, our brief was to look 50 years forward. And so we thought, well, if we look 100 years backwards, we'll realize what we're letting ourselves in for. That kind of volatility, one way or another, will be there in the future as well. But what I wanted to talk about is what we've learned, what the challenges are, what that says about future policies, and an argument, rather like Brian's been saying actually, that we need radical thinking if we're going to take on these challenges. So what have we done? We've commissioned lots of working papers. We've had lots of workshops around government departments. Mark Walpert is the government chief scientific advisor, has been the owner of this. And I give Mark all credit for saying at the outset, we can't do this without getting around a lot of cities. And so Mark and I and colleagues between us have been in something like 25 different cities. At the very least, we've had round tables, but in about a dozen of them, we've finished up with quite close working relationships. And a number of cities have actually wanted to do their own mini Foresight studies. They've welcomed the opportunity to look beyond the 5-year, 10-year statutory planning horizons. So that's the bottom right, and the blue column, basically says we've talked to lots of people about the future of cities. This has gone on for 3 years. As it happens, we've just reported, it's not a conventional report. There are 4 reports on our website, part of the Go Science website. There are 4 reports, and you can get very easy access to those. Lots of working papers, lots of other material. So I'm just going to give you the gist of what is in these reports. We worked at several scales, in a sense 2 scales, but some intermediate ones. The UK system of cities, how is the population going to be distributed in the long run? And then mainly city regions, but of course there are scales in between. There are regions of cities like the Northern Powerhouse, the Oxford, Milton Keynes, Cambridge Arc, and so on, lots of these now. All for interesting base of discussion, down to neighbourhoods. Now, what we found is from the start, we gave ourselves 6 themes. We evolved into 6 themes, and it'll be interesting, as I said at the outset, to compare these to Brian's, but we've lived with these for 3 years, and they've been very serviceable. And I hope what this helps in the context of this session for the Academy, in setting context, is that it helps to provide a big picture. And if we have one high-level message, and again, Brian's already said it from a different perspective, it's that however you construct the themes, however you look at planning policies, different kinds of policy development, everything's interdependent. It's very, very difficult to have a housing policy or a transport policy or an energy policy without actually seeing how everything connects in an urban context. So what I'm going to do is to work through each of these 6 themes and say something about the challenges, something about the policies that, as it were, follow from this, and then something about the need to think rather more radically than we are accustomed to. So first theme centres on people, how people live in cities. Population growth is almost certainly going to be substantial. It's had a lot of publicity recently with new ONS projections, but we're talking about possible increases of 10 million, 25 years. It could be very much more than that in the longer run. And I'll talk about the implications of that in a minute. The interdependence comes from the very simple point that people living in cities need access to work, which is where their incomes derive from, and there's a follow the money argument in this, housing, skills, services, the education system, the health system, potentially a long list. And so part of our argument would be that what planning ought to be about, as well as land use, land development, and densities and the more traditional planning questions, is actually all of this. And all the agencies of government, as it were, should be joined up in this respect. Some very obvious implications then: accelerate house building, accelerate access and connectivity, start to offer personal observations now rather than no longer speaking for the government. The Foresight project has formally ended. If you start to think about expenditure on transport, big intercity projects relative to local projects, and my guess is we're not investing in local projects. And one I could addition here, John Worthington and the Independent Transport Commission have done a tremendous amount of good work on this at both scales. As we've travelled around, I don't want to neglect the final bullet point here. As we've travelled around, and we've always asked people in different places what their biggest challenges were, and first or second was always social disparities, and very much want to keep that on the list. Urban economies, the second theme. How do you develop economic potential? It almost certainly turns on skilled labour force. It does connect to everything else. If you're attracting inward investment into a particular city, it says something not just about skills, but about the quality of the environment, the quality of the housing that's going to attract companies and businesses into the city. And of course, in the UK, there's a particular and well-known productivity challenge, which I'm sure Paul Sweeney will talk about later. Looking ahead, everybody will be now familiar with the hollowing out argument, an argument that something like 50% of contemporary jobs could be automated. You're going to have a high-skilled top end, you're going to have a service, lower income bottom end, and the middle will be hollowed out. Very, very difficult to predict what will really happen. I'm sure it won't be as simple as that, and I remain optimistic with the right sort of skills level we'll invent new forms of work. The Darwin quote I'll offer at coffee time, I think, rather than taking time now, but effectively, I'll give it to you because I think it's a wonderful one. From the origin of species, the species that survive are not the most brave or the most intelligent, but those that adapt most effectively to change. And we're in an era of very rapid change. Theme 3, sustainability, climate change, the challenges that go with that. And I don't think we have a good picture of what a sustainable city will really look like. The trends in many cases seem to be going in the wrong direction in terms of longer trips, car trips, low density development, and what we actually see are contradictory objectives, what people want relative to what we might like to see if we put sustainability at the top of our agenda, and that leads to some fairly obvious policy consequences. Fourth theme was urban form, the shape of cities, obviously planning land use to accommodate population growth. I think our housing policy at present and the way we're actually developing housing policy bears very little resemblance to the need to meet a population increase of something like 10 million in a foreseeable future time horizon. So in terms of land use planning, very, very serious challenges that follow from, as it were, the challenges of the other themes. So it's actually interdependence again. And the final bullet point there is on land value, the challenges of land value, particularly in cities like London, but in many other cities as well, and how you can actually capture increase in land values to support the kind of public investment that will allow us to drive forward in ways that meet other challenges. We've heard already today arguments about placemaking from Alex and Grosvenor. It's very much, I think, an agreed agenda in a planning context. I'm sure it is in this academy. Actually achieving that, I think, still remains a battle. And you know, the debates about densities you will be very familiar with. In terms of accommodating population growth, I know this is a controversial thing. I've been very taken by the Wilson Prize notion that we should be thinking big in terms of development and not small developments on the edges of small towns and cities, which is on the whole what we're getting now. The beginning to be signs that this has happened. I know Urbed have done a big study of Sheffield, for example, which I think has now been published. Fifth theme, if I'm counting correctly, infrastructure, which obviously knits everything together, energy, utilities, transport, again, back to the Independent Transport Commission's work on North European cities, you know, lots of important lessons for us there. And it is going to be what stitches everything together. Delighted that we have a National Infrastructure Commission, needs the same kind of serious thinking already happening in London, London having a 2050 infrastructure plan. So the thinking is happening. Connects to the smart cities agenda. I'm arguing there that you know, tremendously important, but it tends to be for the immediate and the short run and being efficient, all very important stuff. How can we be smart for the long run? How can we make sure that smart city thinking connects also to the, you know, what I would call the wicked problems, the problems that have been around for decades, the problems that all governments have tried to make progress with, social disparities being the obvious example. So as well as being smart, we have to continually remember that we have those kinds of challenges. Governance was the sixth theme. Pretty clear then, now that we have the devolution agenda. What does that actually mean? My own view would be that we still have to do some very serious thinking about principles of subsidiarity, what decisions and what plans are developed at what levels. And we need to follow the flows of public money, see how it could be different, how we can attract private investment. And Centre for Cities have done some, you know, really interesting work on that. And again, it's about joining up. It's about being prepared to think long term. And the point that I want to make then about this slide, before I move on, just to take a few minutes on being radical, is, you know, how do we look ahead in a particular way? From the point of view of the Foresight project, we knew from the outset that it's totally obvious intuitively, and it's totally obvious from a scientific point of view, for all sorts of very good reasons, that you can't forecast very far ahead. So if we're trying to look 50 years ahead, it's not going to be through forecasts. What we can do is actually develop a range of scenarios for what cities can look like and what the UK urban system can look like in 25 years' time, 40 years' time, 50 years' time. And then we can actually use our science capabilities, our analytical capabilities, to explore how different kinds of scenarios would work. And I think in the Foresight project, we developed some very interesting scenario work. Tim and Space Syntax did part of it. We did others through Arab connections. But I think we have a long way to go on that. And I would urge, serious exploratory thinking for a very wide range of scenarios, different ways of meeting these challenges within different kinds of resource constraints. So if we try and think radically, there will be innovation, there will be new transport modes. We can envisage now, much more sustainable modes. We can envisage different forms of high density living, developments over transport hubs, this kind of thing. But let's look at some of the wicked problems. I don't think we're yet taking the population growth challenge seriously. I've already said something about that, and that couples with the land value challenge. Social disparities. How do we begin to get into this? And there's a list here on this slide, which I've, in a sense, it's part of the social disparities challenge, but it also works for everything else. And investing in education, and I've said they're beyond skills. I worry a bit. I'm probably a bit old-fashioned in worrying that I don't want education to be turned into a training agenda, because that actually, I think, won't work in the short run. I'm actually a mathematician. I believe that everybody did degrees in mathematics. That would actually work very well for the long run. But I have biases in that respect. But you know what I mean? We can be too narrow, and we've become very instrumental in education. But we've got to force the access to the 20% of kids who are basically coming out of the UK education system illiterate, unnumerate, and it's been like that more or less forever. It is getting better in some respects, but most of that 20% is still there. And I think we need a sort of brute force attack on that. And although that sounds like a social policy question, I wanted to argue very strongly it's an urban question if we're going to tackle something like the social disparities challenge. And that goes through service delivery, it goes through employment, families with generations of unemployed, find a way of, as it were, breaking into that. The economy, productivity outside the greater southeast, hollowing out, education again. Brian talked about the transition to knowledge-intensive economies. I think we could do very interesting things to integrate colleges and universities through new kinds of industries into the economy. Universities are charged to do that. I would say, sitting in a university, we're not yet doing it sufficiently effectively. I've cited the NHS there in terms of NHS, MRC funding, working locally, and how it gets combined. And I think there are possibilities. I think it was actually mentioned in the nurse review of doing this in other knowledge-intensive areas that could then be driven into, as it were, the real economy. The planning system, everybody here is part of this. Given interdependence, create a new planning that recognises this interdependence, incorporating that the sustainability challenges. And from where I come academically, I would say, make sure that we add good analytics to that. I think I'm about to move myself to the Turing Institute, data science. We're going to move to a possibility where we can have good real-time intelligence for city planners, city leaders, and indeed city communities. And my guess would be that within 5 years, with the right kind of investment and effort, we could achieve that. So I think analytics will be a big part of this. Final slide, and I have 20 seconds to go on the timer over there. Can we do it? Devolution will help. Government needs to be joined up. I think our experience of this is we've certainly been in cities where very innovative joining up is happening. I think, if I dare say it, Whitehall still has a long way to go. There are parts of Whitehall that really want to join up, and we need that in order to meet these challenges. Get the analysis right, get the wicked problems and the broader challenges on the table, and then we need the leadership, the governance, and at the end, radical thinking. And I still have 20 seconds to go. Something's happening to the clock. Oh, no, it's gone minus. It's gone minus. Thank you very much.